This is day 7 of Unit 4. We started today with a ticket in the door quiz, so if you missed class, be sure to see me to make that up. And then we did a warm-up. So pause the video, try the warm-up, and then play to check your answers. So completing the square, the first thing I have to do is get that 18v over. So I'm going to subtract 18v from both sides. So 9v squared minus 18v plus 5 equals 0. So I'm going to go ahead and factor out the 9 from the v squared and the 18v. So minus 2v. And then we have plus 5 on the end. So after I have factored out the 9, I'm left with v squared minus 2v. So now I'm ready to complete the square. So I'm taking half of negative 2, which gives me negative 1. I'm squaring negative 1, and I'm getting positive 1. So I'm adding 1, but it's actually 9 that I added, which means I have to subtract 9. So I have 9 times the quantity of v minus 1 squared, which is what we had before we squared, minus 4, and that equals 0. I'm trying to solve this, not put it in vertex form, so I need to keep going here. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides, divide by 9. I have v minus 1, the quantity squared, equals 4/9. Now I'm ready to take the square root of each side. Square root of something squared is the absolute value. The square root of 4/9 is 2/3. So to solve that absolute value, I set it equal to plus or minus 2/3, and I add 1. Now, because those are numbers that you can easily combine, you're not done. You didn't combine like terms. So 1 is 3/3. 3/3 plus 2/3 is 5/3. 5/3. Doesn't want to write that for me. Okay. My pen stopped writing. 5/3. And 3/3 minus 2/3 is 1/3. So 5/3 and 1/3 are my two solutions. Okay, so then we did a few examples today. So go ahead and put this one in your notes. So we talked about all the different techniques for solving quadratic equations, and they are factoring sometimes works if it's factorable. Quadratic formula and completing the square will always work if it's a quadratic equation. And the last is square roots technique, and that'll only work when the quadratic does not have an x. So this has an x, which means square roots technique is out. And again, quadratic formula completing the square will definitely work. I'm not sure yet whether this is going to factor or not. So I'm going to get it set equal to 0 by subtracting 5 from each side, and I'm going to check to see if it factors, because factoring is probably the easiest technique. So if it factors, I'm going to factor it. If not, then I'll either use completing the square or quadratic formula. So to factor, I'm checking negative 30 on the top and negative 7 on the bottom. So 10 and 3, and the sign is negative for the 10. So then it does factor. So first box, first term. Last box, last term. Negative 10 with an x and positive 3 with an x. Across the rows and down the column, 6x squared and negative 10x is a 2x. 3x and negative 5 is a positive 1. Down 3x squared and 6x, 3x and 6x squared is 3x. And negative 10x and negative 5 is negative 5. So I have 3x minus 5 and 2x plus 1. And remember, that equals 0. I'm not done because I'm supposed to solve, okay? So you don't want to stop with just factoring. So zero product property says each of those terms or factors can be set equal to 0. And solved. So 3x equals 5. 2x equals negative 1, which means x equals 5/3. or x equals negative 1/2. Okay, so we didn't have to use quadratic formula completing the square. We were able to factor that. Next, so this time I'm noticing this is a cubic. Cubics do not use the same techniques as quadratics. Okay, so quadratic formula is out. It's not quadratic. Solving by square roots, that's out because it's not quadratic. I can't take the cube root of both sides. That's not going to work because there's an x over here. And I can't use completing the square because it's not squared. It's not a quadratic. So the only thing left after we've checked out all those possibilities, when it's cubic, the only option at this point is to factor. Now, when we get later in the year learning more about polynomials, we'll learn about other ways of solving cubics. But for now, the only technique that's possible is to factor. So if you see something cubic, you're going to factor it. So I'm going to subtract 75x so that it's set equal to 0. So it's now set up that I can factor. I'm going to pull out the GCF. Still set equal to 0. I'm going to continue factoring that difference of squares. And then I have zero product property. Now, when I set the factors equal to 0, I will not forget there's 3 factors. We have x plus 5, x minus 5, and 3x. So don't forget 3x also has to be set equal to 0, so which means x equals 0, x equals negative 5, and x equals positive 5. Okay, so there are 3 solutions. When you're solving something that's cubic, it generally does have 3 solutions. Later, again, when we get to polynomials, we'll talk more about that. But for the most part, whatever the exponent is, the highest exponent, that's how many solutions there will be. So if I only got these 2, I would recognize, oh, I think I missed something. Yes, I forgot the third 0. Next, so it's quadratic. It's set equal to 0. My options I know for sure are quadratic formula or completing the square. I don't know yet whether this factors, so I'll check that. I also don't know, well, I do know I can't use square roots technique because of the x. So let's see if it factors first, and then we'll go from there. I at least see a 2 GCF, so I'm going to pull that out. So 2x squared plus 4x plus 1. And then I'm checking 2x squared plus 4x plus 1. Looks like 2 on the top and 4 on the bottom, which does not factor. So now I have, using zero product property, either 2 equals 0, which 2 does not equal 0, or 2x squared plus 4x plus 1 equals 0, which I'm now going to try and solve. Okay, so I already tried to factor it. It doesn't. So I can either use the quadratic formula here or complete the square, but I can't factor it and I can't use square roots technique. So we're going to do, this one wouldn't be bad actually by completing the square, because half, when we factor out the 2 and take half of 2, that's pretty easy. But we're going to get some practice on quadratic formula because we haven't discussed that yet this year. I know you learned about it in geometry and Algebra 1. But remember, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and that's all over 2 times a. That's the quadratic formula, and you should have that memorized. So substituting in the opposite of b, so negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is 1, and that's all over 2 times a, which is 2. So simplifying that, negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. Negative 4 times 2 times 1 is negative 8, and 2 times 2 is 4. So I'm going to simplify further. Negative 4 plus or minus 16 minus 8 is 8, and that's all over 4. This is the point where in geometry you were told you could stop or get a decimal approximation. Now we've been doing these the last several days, so we know how to simplify further. So I'm going to simplify that radical. Square root of 8 simplifies to 2 root 2, and that's all over 4. So I'm looking at the 4 and the 2 and seeing there's a GCF of 2. So I have 2 times negative 2 plus or minus root 2, and that's all over 4. And then I can simplify the 2/4. So my final answer for x is -2 plus or minus the square root of 2 all over 2. And those are the solutions for x. Okay, again, could have gotten the same answer had we used completing the square. Would have been, I guess, just as easy. Next one. So when you see this problem, when I see it, I immediately think of a technique that I should use. Hopefully you're recognizing that as well. I immediately notice there's no x. And if there's no x and it's a quadratic equation, I immediately think square roots technique. So square roots technique means I want to get the numbers together on the other side. So I'm going to add 70 to both sides. I can't take the square root yet, but I can once I divide by 3. 72 divided by 3 is 24. Now I can take the square root of each side. We remember from yesterday, the square root of x squared is the absolute value of x. And I'll simplify root 24 to 2 root 6. Right? I think that's right. And then so x equals plus or minus 2 root 6. Okay. We certainly could have used the quadratic formula here as well. I don't think this one factors, but we could have used quadratic formula. But probably the easiest technique when it's a quadratic with no x is to use the square roots method. So that takes care of our examples for today. Here are the topics you need to know for tomorrow's quiz. So make sure you know those. Again, to study for math, we do practice problems. So I would pick a few problems of each of those and try them tonight. Try them from scratch. Blank piece of paper, try a few problems of each of those. Remember, you don't study for math by just looking at problems that are already done. You study by actually doing them. So go ahead and do that tonight. Study or practice a couple problems of each of these types. So your homework, you're going to finish up page 10. You're going to do Unit 3, worksheet number 4, the odds only. That is not a typo. I intentionally have Unit 3, even though we're in 4. So I do want you to go back and do Unit 3, worksheet number 4, just the odds. And you'll also do pages 15 and 16. Your quiz is tomorrow on all the topics that I just showed you.